Book 1, The Missing Princess, Part 1, Chapter 5. "Go where?" asked Lashana, curiously following Ashta into the house. Annoyed, Ashta walked over to the kitchen sink and stopped. To her surprise, the blood was gone and so was Yinlin's body. She stared at the spot, and a bluebird flew into the house. The tiny animal landed in front of Ashta and chirped. A moment later, Lashana and the man walked into the house, staring at the floor with wide eyes. "What happened to the man? He was right there," cried Lashana's friend, pointing, and Lashana looked at him annoyed. "Kevin, shut it!" she snapped. Confused about where Yinlin's body went and who cleaned up the blood, Ashta turned to the faucet and washed off her hands and face. She pulled off her shirt and threw it in the trash. Lashana and her friend looked at her in surprise, and then Ashta gave her a solid look. "The Forbidden Forest," stated Ashta, and ran up the stairs. When she got to her room, she pulled on a pair of black cargo pants, boots, and a black tank top. Ashta put her hair in a ponytail, put on the halter vest for the samurai swords and kendo sticks, and pulled on a pair of fingerless gloves. Surprisingly, Lashana was still in the kitchen, but the guy she had called Kevin was gone. Ashta looked at Lashana thoughtfully. "Look, I wish things were different, and I'm sure we would have been really great friends, but I have to leave," she said quickly. "I'm coming with you," Lashana confidently stated, giving Ashta a clipped nod. Heavily, Ashta sighed, looking at Lashana, and shook her head. "Lashana, listen, where I'm going is very dangerous," Ashta explained, grabbing her backpack, and Lashana put her hands on her hips, standing in front of the doorway. "I'm not letting you go by yourself," Lashana firmly said, crossing her arms, and Ashta looked at her thoughtfully. "I'm not human like you are," she said, glancing at the girl, and Lashana didn't budge. "I know how to fight, and I have a few toys of my own," Lashana said, eyeing Ashta's weapons. Ashta felt like she didn't have a choice and hoped Lashana could hold her own. But what choice did she have? Even if she had said no, Ashta felt the girl would follow her anyway. "Fine, let's go get your things," Ashta breathed with a sigh. She knew she would eventually have to protect Lashana no matter what kind of weapons she had. "Great," Lashana said, as her eyes light up. Ashta followed Lashana to her house and waited outside while she gathered her things. A few moments later, Lashana came out wearing tan cargo pants, boots, a white tank top, and a camping pack over her shoulders. Not only that, she had a black duffel bag. "Ready?" Lashana asked, and Ashta eyed the duffel bags. "Are you moving into the forest?" she teased, quickly smirking. Lashana looked down at the duffel bag and shook her head. "No, these are my toys I mentioned." "All right, shall we?" asked Ashta, and the girl nodded. The girls walked down the road and headed toward the Forbidden Forest. As they walked past, the townspeople stared at them, and Ashta and Lashana ignored their gawking stares, reaching the forest. Some of the villagers followed them to see where they were going. "You can't go in there!" a man shouted from behind, and Ashta and Lashana turned around. "Let them!" called another man from the other side of the small crowd. "What does it matter to you?" asked Ashta, looking at the man. A couple of townspeople who followed them murmured to each other as they watched. "You know you make it out of there alive, you stupid girls," called an old woman who Ashta had run into before. Ashta shook her head and Lashana glared at the crowd. Ashta saw how upset her friend was getting and gently put her hand on her shoulder. Lashana looked at her. "Don't worry about them. Let them talk. We have to go." Lashana nodded, and they both turned from the crowd. They carefully slipped through the first set of trees, and everyone and everything disappeared behind them. "What do you think is out here?" Lashana asked, moving through the trees carefully. The forest looked typically healthy, with autumn-colored plant life growing everywhere, and the trees were tall, making a shade cover with their branches above. "I'm not sure," said Ashta, climbing over a fallen tree. Suddenly, a roar echoed through the trees, and Ashta and Lashana looked at each other in fear. "What is that?" whispered Lashana, and Ashta shook her head with wide eyes. "I'm not sure, but let's get out of here," she stated, and without hesitation they began moving quickly through the forest. A crashing sound came from behind, heading straight for the girls. "Come on, Lashana, faster!" called Ashta, turning around, and her eyes widened. A monstrous troll-looking creature was charging toward them, and Ashta turned, seeing a hollowed tree ahead of them. "There!" she said, pointing. Lashana nodded and followed Ashta to the tree. The creature was on their heels as they reached the tree, and Ashta grabbed Lashana by the shoulders. Swiftly, she shoved Lashana into the tree as the creature's ugly arm swung, hitting Ashta and sending her flying through the air. She hit the trunk of a tree nearby. Ashta fell to the ground with a hard thud and groaned. Dazed, she opened her eyes, coughed, and shook her head as the creature snarled, clawing at the ground. She got to her feet and glared at the troll. The beast approached her and angrily roared in her face. The roar was so mighty it knocked Ashta on her backside, but she got right back to her feet, gave the monster a stern look, walked up to it, and yelled back at it. The troll stiffened, looking at her wide-eyed, and started to whimper. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you could have killed me," Ashta heatedly breathed, looking at the creature with a stern stare. The troll groaned, throwing its arms out like a frustrated child. "Well, you should be more careful next time. It's not nice to scare people," she scolded, and the creature held her breath, searching her eyes. Then the creature groaned, throwing its hands at Ashta, and walked away, mumbling incoherent things. She shook her head as Lashana poked her head out of the tree. "Ashta?" she called, looking around nervously. "Right here." Lashana looked at her friend and sighed in relief. "What did you do to it?" she asked, searching Ashta's eyes. "I scolded him." Lashana looked at her oddly and only nodded. "Keep an open mind. This isn't the world that I know," Lashana told herself as she and Ashta made her way through the forest. "So what are you?" Lashana asked, and Ashta looked at her. "I don't know. My grandfather told me I was some princess given away at birth and now on a journey to bring my family together," Ashta said quickly, and Lashana looked at her thoughtfully. "Good old family drama. I am no stranger when it comes to family drama," she said with a smirk. Ashta gave her a knowing look, and Lashana put her hands up defensively. "Everyone has their own sort of family drama." Ashta thought for a moment and then nodded. They pressed on through the forest until they came to a clearing with a spring. "Do you want to take a break?" Ashta asked, and Lashana nodded. "How come this girl isn't even breaking a sweat?" wondered Lashana, wiping the sweat from her brow, and looked at Ashta. The girls used their hands to drink from the spring and get their heads wet. Lashana pulled out a granola bar and ate it. "Would you like one?" Ashta shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm not really hungry." Lashana nodded and stuck the wrapper inside the pocket of her backpack. "This is actually a pretty nice forest," Lashana said, looking around. Ashta smiled and nodded, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind whistling through the trees, the birds chirping in the branches. But then she heard an unfamiliar sound, and then realized it was the sound of footsteps. Immediately, Ashta looked at Lashana and signaled for her to be quiet. "Come on, let's go see what this asshole's problem is." Ashta recognized that voice. It was the voice of one of the men who had killed her grandfather. "David, you know he only acts like this when one of those stupid humans try to come through the forest." Ashta's eyebrows shot down in anger, realizing they were the men that killed Yinlin. Quickly, she slipped off her camping pack and quietly set it on the ground. Lashana did the same with her duffel bag and her camping pack. She saw that Ashta had her hand on the butt of her sword, so she unzipped her duffel bag and pulled out a thick wooden bow with a leather sheath of arrows. She slid the sheath on her back and stood next to Ashta. "Who are they?" whispered Ashta as she peered carefully around the tree. She saw two men and pulled her head back, looking at Lashana. "Those are the men that killed my grandfather," Ashta explained, peering at the men from behind the tree, and Lashana swallowed hard. "I hope you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. As the saying goes, a life for a life," whispered Ashta, pulling her sword. Lashana pulled an arrow from her sheath and nodded. "Wait!" one of the men called, and their footsteps stopped. "What, bro?" Ashta heard sniffing sounds. "Do you smell that? That can't be right," said one of the men. "What do you smell?" "I smell a human. But there is something else. I smelled it at the old man's place. Well, whatever it is, it's not going to get past us. Ashta felt anger rise as she looked at Lashana. Ready? She whispered, and Lashana nodded nervously. Ashta nodded, took a deep breath, and walked out from behind the tree as she drew her sword. "Want to bet?" she growled.